Okay, recording has started. Hello. So we did some pre-triage. You all can see the screen, I guess. I think I'm sharing it right. Yeah. So just briefly go over things. This one didn't really need a lot of discussion from us. There's a regression. It's issuing a warning. You can read some of the details there. Where there was a bug fix. There was a bug and a bug fix, and now we're doing the bug fix via warning, as we usually do. Here's some interesting questions that have come up. We've discussed in prior meetings the question of when drop order should occur for async FNs, and we basically fixed the main problem. So unused parameters are now being dropped at roughly the time that you expect them to be. However, in so doing, we encountered some discrepancies in the drop order with normal functions. Like basically what we're doing now is something like this. If you imagine there's some pattern here, and we're sort of desugaring this something like kind of like this, which is sort of how I always imagined functions work, but it turns out they actually drop. There are some subtle differences in order which drops might occur, but like if you compare it to a regular function, in the case where you have patterns with underscores and things like that. And I forget all the exact details. The question is, how much do we care about this? Do we want to sort of match precisely the order of normal FNs at the cost of making the implementation more complex and the desugaring much more complex? Or do we want to say that the ordinary drop order of functions is kind of wrong? And like, too bad that we're not going to change it, but you know, it's close enough. I think that
I feel like.
Go on.
Oh, I was going to say, last time we talked about this, Felix was the person who had the strongest opinion, so maybe, I don't know, discussing it.
Yeah, I was going to say that my hunch is we can't make any decisions here because we don't have enough quorum. And we should leave it nominated. And
I would also think that Boats would probably have an opinion somewhere.
It might be something worth, yeah, okay. I agree with you. Let's just move on from it and we'll come back to it. People feel free to leave it.
It sort of felt to me like the default answer is it matches. Someone should make an argument if it shouldn't.
Yeah, it's hard to make a principled argument that's not based on. It's annoying to implement. I think my argument would be that I don't like the order in which FNs drop their things, but I know that's not a very good one because that is the order.
So I can see one other argument for not matching, which is that I would expect to see a lot of interfaces that match up a kind of a slot to call an async fun with an async fun, and frameworks, for example, web frameworks, other things where there's a fixed calling signature and you don't always need all the pieces of that calling signature. And so if you force holding on to the things you've been passed until you're actually called, then you can't necessarily optimize that. That said, I'm not suggesting that's a good enough reason to change this, both because it's different and because that assumes that not only will you have a lot of those frameworks, but they will be passing around things that have drop inputs.
Yeah, that feels like it has more to do with yesterday's debate, though. But like about the when do you drop relative to the creation of the future versus this question, which is more of like assuming you're going to drop after the future has been pulled, in what order within that do we drop? But let's cover it. Let's put it off because I think Taylor's right that we don't have enough quorum for it. Maybe we can elaborate in a specific example in the issue. Oh, there already is one. Okay,
so
great.
One thing that I would like to keep in mind is that, like, I don't know. We had it on the schedule to plan out timeline for Async-await. I think that's going to be kind of hard without Central or Boats or
Right.
Felix or anybody here.
It's like a lot of things would be hard.
I feel like I'm spinning my wheels trying to get everybody collected to actually finish up that doc so we can get it released. I've been pinging people daily to try and get that filled out, but I don't know what. I guess we have a separate topic to discuss this, but in any case, aside from that, it feels like we're very close to having something that's stabilization ready. And I don't want to have this be a thing that like we discuss it in 2 weeks when everything else is in a line and we're like, oh yeah, this is the thing that's going to make it, miss a release.
That makes sense. I mean, so in terms of this meeting, what do you propose we do?
I have no idea. I don't know what I like. I don't know what I want us to do right now. I'm like pointing out a problem that I think that we need to solve.
That's fair. Yeah. I agree we should not let this slide forever. Okay. I think we should come back to it next time. I have some thoughts, but I'm avoiding saying them because I don't want to get dragged back into discussing this when we already agreed we won't be able to reach a conclusion. I have some thoughts on a case for the current drop order, but all right.
Okay.
But I also have some thoughts on how we could implement the proper fix. So I'll try to put those on the thread at least, which might give us more data, whatever the proper fix is, so we can have the most matching order. Do we think that we should just skip over this too, Taylor? The impl parameter thing? Or do you think it's worth?
I mean,
I think we should.
I mean, the people who care aren't here, right, is the issue. So I don't know what, unless there's somebody here who cares a lot.
I don't know. Well, at least we would find out if there is. All right. I'll briefly cover what's going on here because I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we can go over it real quick and see if anybody has anything that like sticks out to them. But
right, that's what I mean. So, today, if you're allowed to elide lifetimes in impl headers, thanks to Rust 2018. So, but you are not allowed to elide lifetimes completely invisibly. They can't be totally hidden. So for example, if you have like the ref type, you have to write tick underscore when there's a lifetime parameter. You don't get to just leave it out in an impl header. That's not true in like a function for backwards compatibility reasons. The reason we did this is because we intended to fully deprecate this behavior. And there is in fact a warning, but you have to opt into the warning right now. The reason is that those warnings needed work and they weren't ready to go when we did Rust 2018. The intention is to turn them on after a while. And I realize now that that's a work item we've been letting slide, but that's totally independent from this. So we figured there was no reason to support the older behavior in newer code. We share a lot of the code as it happens in the compiler that handles impl headers and async FNs. And so this error issue has to do with people who were not using tick underscore and they were not getting the results they expected. One way to fix it is basically to make that a hard error in the same way that it is in impl headers, saying like that's deprecated, you should write tick underscore. This is what I prefer, mostly because I find code without tick underscore very hard to read, but also because it's probably easier. It obviously would be backwards compatible if we wanted to allow the older behavior at some point. But Central raised this, tagged this, I think, because he thought, and I agree, that it would be good to run it by people here. See if anyone objects to that or feels we should not do that.
I think it's the conservative choice. We should do it and not block async fun on potentially doing something, right? If we can always make it the other way later, we're fine.
That's roughly my opinion as well.
And we roughly already decided that we're going to deprecate this, so.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I personally agree with that. I think that the counter argument, right, is that it makes async-fn look like it has missing features compared to other parts of the language, right? Which is an impression that we're trying to avoid.
We could also try and just get that lint on by default at around the same time that async fun stabilizes.
Actually, it's not crazy, but yeah, I'm not too worried about the missing features. I think if we say that it's deprecated or something, I don't know, it would at least look missing. But
yeah, I mean,
we still understand why.
That is certainly my position.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, we can do it there. So there's 2 RFCs nominated. I think this one we already talked about, the raw reference. I talked to Ralph, but didn't yet find a perfect date for that. But the other one, existential types with external definition. So this RFC is about, here I have it, is about allowing you to define an existential type, infiltrate, and then specify the value in some other crate. The idea being that you could define like a global allocator this way, or other kinds of global configuration. It's probably a good idea. It's certainly an idea. I'm certainly sympathetic to the problem they're trying to solve. But Taylor and I were discussing in the pre-triage and thinking that it's not anything we've had on our roadmap or that like fits any of our priorities, and we were inclined to postpone it and suggest that we revisit this at a later time. But we're wanting to take the temperature of the room about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest motivator for me there is that it doesn't feel like something that's like tractably within reach of implementation in the next year or so. So doing anything other than closing it right now feels sort of dishonest. I don't know. Like we could postpone and say like maybe we'll come back to this, but.
I think you've got a good point. So it's not only that it's not on the roadmap; it's that it's one of the things we're trying to avoid. I think is designing too far ahead of where we are in the compiler. Like we're already far enough ahead as it is. I think like infiltrate is on shaky footing in general. I mean, that's my opinion.
I concur with that. We say this year is not new things. We're just finishing other things.
Right.
Maybe future. Maybe with an explicit note of like, we're not making any statement of whether the feature is good or bad.
Right.
His goal certainly sounds interesting.
Yeah. I'm willing to write a write-up and move to postpone. Although I'm happy if someone else wants to.
Yeah. Well, another thing, right, is that it has this sort of potentially crazy impact on compile times and everything, right? I mean, there's lots of.
Yeah, it's not a small implementation. It's a big job to design and implement this feature. It's not a small thing. It's not a workaround.
And cross-crate type inference is.
I mean, it's essentially equivalent to generic modules, right? Like you kind of, in terms of compilation, right?
Right.
It's even more than that, right? Because it's cross-crate.
So
generic modules that could be instantiated cross-crate.
So who wants to write this comment and do the thing? Me, Taylor, or Scott? We've talked. All right, I'll do it. All right. Unassigned RFCs. So there are 3 here, 3 groups. I want to do them in reverse ordering. I picked out these 2, standard aware cargo and portable packed SIMD vector types, as possible candidates to discuss at a later meeting. The idea being they seem like things that could happen, particularly standard aware cargo, which it's not a squarely laying item, but we obviously are interested in it, and it would be nice to have someone talk about it and sort of tell us what's to be interested in and try to figure out what the Lang team opinion is on this.
I think it'd be worth having that conversation and including a couple members of the cargo team, ideally.
Yeah, that's a good point. hopefully include members of. So the question is, does anybody care? Does anybody volunteer or want to be the person who does that summary and drives that forward? Or does anyone here have an opinion of who that might be a good person to do that? I don't mind getting it scheduled. But. Josh, aren't you a cargo-aware sort of person? Or is this out of your wheelhouse?
I am a member of the cargo team. I do not have anywhere near the expertise to drive this particular topic, and for the next month, I am buried alive.
Okay. Do we have a sense of like the next month?
I mean, Oates is another reasonable person, right? Like.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's a work item here of like get it scheduled and talk to boats if they're interested.
I'm here also.
Oh, hey, you're here now. Welcome. We were talking. How long have you been here?
Long enough to hear the entire conversation.
Okay.
I don't know anything about this RFC. So.
All right. Well, actually, it seems plausible that the RFC
I guess
might want to present it.
I'm not on the cargo team, so I thought that I wasn't the right person, but I do actually know about this RFC, so I don't know. I guess I could volunteer, but I will have less insight than someone on the cargo team, I think.
I think it doesn't have to be perfect right there. Hopefully we'll get some of them. Hopefully we'll get some people who are involved in the conversation to be around and add to your insight. Let's just try to schedule it first, and then we'll worry about this. Doesn't seem like it's that big a deal.
I don't know how this could possibly interact with what I could say.
What?
Like I don't even know how this interacts with what they're proposing it.
That's kind of what we want.
So there's a lot of stuff around like portability and what the behavior of panic equals a port is and stuff like that has lang interop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why that's all compiled into one RFC with. This is a whole space that always confuses me. Like, I don't know how to systemize it. But anyways, well, whatever.
What about portable packed SIMD vector types? Is anyone familiar with this one?
That sounds like a Josh one.
That is one I would be happy to help with under the banner of the FFI and C parity working group, with the caveat of we need to have the other conversation about Meta getting working groups started before that. But I'm happy to take that one in the queue.
Oh, okay. You would more file under FFI. Okay, let's come back to that.
FFI/C parity or similar. I'm still not quite sure.
Okay.
I've had a few people suggest that the nature of what I'm describing as FFI should be broadened a little bit to include effectively parity.
It turns out to be a pretty good lead-in to some of the things I wanted to talk about with working groups. So let's put a pin in that comment and we'll return to it. Well, the only other, so there are these two RFCs that you opened, Josh, about floating point types of various kinds. And my main reaction to them was that I had no idea they were coming. And I don't quite know how they fit into our general priorities. Like, it's not clear if they're a part of, in your mind, like a C parity FFI thing, or if they serve a different function. So I'd be curious.
So one of them is kind of half C parity, half intercepting future hardware. The other one is something C doesn't have, but I'm expecting C to get as well in the future. But it's actually the other way around. Floating point optimization for extra precision is the one that is half C parity, half intercepting future hardware. The F16B floating point type is primarily about intercepting future hardware that will have hardware support for this. In terms of prioritization, that's something I wanted to bring up briefly in this meeting. as a general rule, I feel like, so I think that the discussion that we had at the all hands was good regarding the idea that there are some RFCs that we want to defer on a basis of we just don't have the time and bandwidth. But that's not so much a statement of we don't care about these things as a statement of we can't do everything and we have to prioritize. And part of the point of creating sub-working groups is that eliminates the we don't have time problem, because the working group looks at it more extensively and then can bring a summary up to the Lang team. And it would be rare for us not to have the time to just look at the results and say, that sounds reasonable, or that doesn't sound reasonable. So on that basis, I have noticed a handful of people starting to use the concept of this isn't a road on the roadmap as a hammer to say, go away and don't come back. And I think that's overstating the conclusions that we had on roadmap and similar. Does that seem like a reasonable statement?
I think I find myself somewhat in between, in that I think I definitely agree that there's, we should have the roadmap is not like a fixed thing, but I also think and that working groups could be useful for this kind of exploration. I also think there is definitely work, even when a working group is doing it, to review and think about and try to understand what's going on, not to mention implementation side. So I guess all I'm saying is that I feel like I would like it if we did think carefully before embarking on an effort about how it's going to fit in with the roadmap and our priorities. The roadmap there meaning to make sure it doesn't, the things that we don't do, if any, because of it, things we should have done. Is that like, I think we need to talk about the priorities in the roadmap, but I do agree it's not an ironclad reason to reject things.
In particular, all I'm trying to make sure is that one possible response to we don't have enough time to do this without dropping something can potentially be a sub-work group does have the time to work on this. Do we have the time to review their conclusions when they're done?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
As opposed to just the concept of, oh, well, this wasn't on the roadmap, so we can't do it.
If we have an actual group and we really have confidence that that's true. I feel a little bit like I would like us to have a structure in place before we start leaning on a structure that doesn't exist too much. Which
I agreed entirely, and like I said, I need to actually start that before I state that claim. I'm just suggesting that could be a escape valve for additional pressure.
Yeah.
I think some of it's what's on the roadmap has a couple of sides to it as well, of like what's the theme of the roadmap as opposed to the details of the roadmap.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
We're definitely going to work on things that weren't explicitly on the list of features.
Yeah, our roadmap wasn't that specific to start.
But we have the theme this year definitely felt like we're trying not to pick up new work where we can avoid it.
I'm wondering if all of this seems like a good, I feel like it would be good to revisit these after we have some working group, talk a little bit about these discussions more in the abstract. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we had two things on the agenda. One was hoped to be sort of quick, which was about the async-await syntax check-in. So we had this plan that we reviewed last time to roughly go over a rough plan to resolve questions around async-await syntax, but I don't think anything got announced, and I wanted to sort of make it actually happen. So I wrote up what I think the plan is, and it'd be good if we could say who's doing what, but since Central is not here and some of those things might have been Central, that might be harder. But I guess the main question is for the summary. So Boats, there were some additions that you had in mind for the summary, like a part that you wanted Central to write or something like that?
Yeah. Because why we shouldn't, there was an argument that was made by both Central and Josh about not avoiding having syntactic sugar, like an additional, like the await question mark form being preferable if that were just the composition of two syntaxes that otherwise exist. And that argument, I think, would be better if one of them made it than trying to make it for them.
I would be more than happy if there is a summary document to edit to provide a detailed write-up of that.
That seems good.
Okay.
And the other
There is. I will send you a link, and you can do that as soon as you like.
Yeah. And I think then the other thing needs to finish is the conclusion where we say that what we're going to do next, which is what we've, yeah. So once the rest of it's done, then I can write that and then post it.
It doesn't seem too hard to write, right?
Yeah, but then I don't know how it should be posted. I think not to my blog. I think that it'd be better if it was posted somewhere.
I'm assuming by conclusion and next steps, you're referring to something that says, how do we make forward progress, rather than something that says, here's which answer we decided on?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Josh, I just sent you the link. Did you get it on Discord?
I did receive the link. Is this the same document that came up at the all hands that in its current form more or less says we all agreed?
No, it's a different one.
Okay, then sure, I'd be happy to see if I can help with that.
I mean,
great. So let's follow up on that tomorrow. And
I think we
Josh,
should post it
for
to
context. For context, Josh, this is one that Boats actually started. So
yeah.
Okay.
So what I think we should do is post it to the issue along with, I would sort of excerpt the conclusion, highlight, like this is the plan, write up, blog posts.
So without writing up the reasoning, can we say now what the plan is, and can we have a timeline for it?
That's what I was just saying, right? The plan is we will, like basically what is kind of summarized here, right? That we are going to, here is a summary document. I feel like we could even post it personally without all the pieces in place. Say, okay, we're still adding some pieces. Maybe you can do some comments if you have thoughts over here or something. But we don't have to do that. I don't care too much. We post the summary document. Then we say, Boats has written one post. We wanted to explore the interaction of for loops. There's a couple blog posts, and we plan to have a meeting, I guess, to reach a conclusion.
What date are we going to have that meeting on?
That was what I was going to ask. So I think also, should we use this meeting for it? I think it makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, given that everybody said they wouldn't be available another time, it seems like it would be a good.
So I don't know what time we should do it at. What date, I mean. There was, how many blog posts? Like
two weeks?
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today? Can we do that?
2 weeks from today is the 9th. I will not be here.
Okay, how about 1 week from today?
That's way too, in theory, we're we're giving other people a chance to respond to the summary before we.
I think we should go, well, so we could do 3 weeks, right?
I also don't think that that time scale is necessary to make, I think that it's fine.
I very much do. I think we need specific dates because so far we haven't been able to make progress without them.
We need a specific date, but we don't need it to be next week. We're not blocked. We're not going to be stabilizing this if other than this thing next week.
Right.
That's the time scale.
I mean,
I think that's true.
Why?
Because we're not done with the implementation.
There are tons of implementation blockers that are not.
There are not tons of implementation blockers. There's one implementation Blocker. There's literally one.
But there's
literally one, and it's even backward compatible.
When is the next release?
It's not going to be in 136, so we have
I mean, if we don't set timescales for ourselves that we can make, then.
But we're talking about saying 3 weeks instead of 1. Is not, we are talking about setting a date. We're saying that it doesn't need to be next week.
I
really agree. We should set a time.
Next Thursday is hyperbolic, but it does need to be soon.
So But as part of a pair of conferences, I'm going to be out from the 3rd through the 16th.
Okay.
I would be more than happy to do it on a non-Thursday date in order to do it sooner if that would make things easier for people.
Does seem like we should. What did you say, Josh? 3rd through the 16th?
I'm out the 3rd of May through the 16th of May.
I'm trying to figure out if it's. Yeah, I guess it is realistic. Well, it seems like if you're out the 3rd of May through the 16th of May, then the only, like, next week is sort of the best time that you would be able to be there, right? I think we could talk about some of the streaming.
I do think that we should take the streaming issue into account by way of let's create an orthogonal syntax that meets that additional requirement. And I think that I also wanted to explicitly mention, by the way, I think Boat's bringing up that new syntax idea for 408 is an important part of the discussion and something we should roll in.
We should probably also, I would like it if we also talked about specific use cases for that, because as someone who uses async-await a lot, that's very rarely the thing that I actually want, is to do a loop over the values like that. Normally I want loops over streams to be concurrent.
So could we talk next week about that?
Sure.
That sounds good.
Okay. May 2nd.
So having some time to write up the document, having a framing discussion next week, and then several weeks after that on the 23rd, or possibly sooner if we can schedule it, having a more final discussion, something along those lines.
We should talk, I think, out of this meeting a little bit. Maybe you and I can Josh talk about it. Like, in terms of, you're going to be away the 3rd to the 16th. Depending on where things are, we might like to, like, waiting till the 23rd doesn't feel ideal because.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it sooner than that if we can.
So let's discuss it a little after and see, like, what. Maybe, but let's at least plan for next week to talk about for loops. And that seems like a good next step. Certainly on this, there's also Friday the 17th, for example, when you are back. Okay, awesome. So what I wanted to talk about with the next section was to talk about the Meadow working group concept and share some thoughts and just sort of start the discussion here. I'll just briefly summarize what I wrote here. So the first thing is sort of what I think as a way to get things started, because I've kind of been spinning reels on how to actually get this working group transition going, is that it would be useful to have a discussion about what the procedure should be. A simplest thing I can think of to make that happen is to start having some weekly meetings to just talk, basically, and hammer through some of the proposals. And I thought that the first thing, these would be separate, I think, from this meeting, and it would be open to people to attend, but hopefully not everybody in this group would have to attend because, like any working group, it should come back. And the first thing I was thinking that would be really good to agree on is to kind of hammer out, actually, what are the problems we're trying to solve, talk a little bit about the problems. I have some thoughts here. That might be something we could talk about in this meeting. I particularly like people's input. And, you know, the rough shape of the solution, which I think we sort of already know, but there's a lot of little details, and like basically writing down well, if we plan to have working groups and some way for ideas to come in like this or that. And so this would function like any working group with periodic updates to the team and so forth. And once we kind of have that, once we've hammered out what we think the problems are and the rough shape of the solution, then we would start digging into more of the details. So that, as it happens, I'm presenting out of order, but that's okay. That, as it happens, I think this is roughly the shape that all working groups should have. That like, it would be great if the first thing we can do is spend some time exploring the problem. This may not be a whole lot of time, but coming up with sort of what is the use cases we plan to tackle and the general shape of the possible solutions that we see, and then selecting sort of the one possible solution that we think is the most promising and the reasons for it. And this would kind of be like the spitballing phase of things that I wrote in my original blog post. But instead of having that be like a per RFC concept, I think it makes more sense for it to be a per working group concept. So you could imagine like the RFC, FFI, just trying to hammer out the problems that they have, the specific scenarios and things that we are trying to do and why and so on. And then in the second phase, going into the exact solutions and in more detail. So that was kind of the spirit in which I thought about coming up with problems. And here's a list of problems, but I'm going to stop here for a second and see if what I said makes sense so far to people. Okay, I'm assuming that's a yes. So when I thought about what are the problems that I see that I would like to sort of solve by jiggering up our process, this is the stuff that I came up with. And actually, Josh, I think this last point relates to what we were saying about the earlier, which is, first that not everybody needs to make every decision, that right now we kind of have only this one meeting and it's not a lot of times things aren't that exciting or relevant, so it's kind of hard to know. I think a big one is that we're not communicating very well to the outside world. What does the team think, and what are the things that we are working on and prioritizing? Like, we have kind of a lot of individual comments about what we as individuals feel, but we're not like sending a clear signal about, actually the Lang team is focused on X, Y, and Z right now, and that's what we're spending our time on, which I think could be really divergent, right? Like, we might as individuals be really interested in all kinds of features and hammering out speculative discussion, but that's not necessarily where the team is. I personally feel this a lot, that there's a lot of work around a feature and we're not very good at dividing it up. I would like it if we were better so that we could, basically I think what winds up happening is we just don't do all the work that we could be doing. Like, we don't have, it's really hard to follow the discussions. We don't centralize the results so that you can later come back and understand the reasoning for any given thing. We don't have explainers telling you how to use features most of the time. We don't, for a lot of features, we don't have documentation. Like the Rust reference may or may not get fully updated and so on. I feel like those things are really part of the job and we should be doing them as we go, and we should be trying to do them together. What is this? I have no idea what I meant by this. Discord on RFC thread. Oh, just that there is Discord, not Discord, the chatting mechanism. Just that often there's conflict, maybe on RFC threads, and I think that's partly a symptom of them trying to serve too many purposes, and so on. This one I think is the last one I want to focus on, which is that we should be sure that we're spending our time and energy on the right things. I think right now we often get, like, when people open RFCs and so on, our practice, a lot of time we end up spending potentially a lot of time sort of dealing with ideas that are dragging us off of the course we wanted to set. I would like to make sure we're making progress on the items we feel are essential. I'm curious if this is like the kind of problems people see, if they think there are other problems that aren't listed.
I was thinking one other item, which is when opening an RFC, there is a degree to which we are either relying on organic discovery, or we are manually rallying people we think might care to an RFC. The former has the notion that the tone of an entire RFC discussion can be set by the first couple of people to show up. And if the first couple of people to show up take a general tone of, I don't want this, so go away, it must not be important, then that can set the entire tone of an RFC thread. It is difficult after that point to try to get more voices involved, and especially to get more voices involved without the feeling like, let me go rally people that I know actually want this. So there's a degree to which not just team attention, but community attention is a concern, and getting things raised up the flagpole for people to notice.
That's a really good point.
Helps, but the set of people who notice before a This Week in Rust surfaces it can be quite different.
Yeah. I might add lack of feedback on close to stabilization features.
That's a good one.
Some of these things are only partially us, but I think it's okay. We should be.
Considering, yeah.
It's probably also just, or earlier, just in general. My assumption about the conflict on RFC threads that I didn't really spell out, but I think is relevant to what you said, is that I think that the more that we can get a team of people sort of involved as early as possible, the more that we can engender a group and team feeling, the basically the better off we will be, as well as keeping our discussions, focused on one thing at a time, which seems to be kind of distinct from some of what we've done before. Of like, we've tried opening a lot of issues, and each issue is on one thing at a time, but there's a lot of issues. I don't know, but that we'll have to see. Okay, so one thing I wanted to get out of this meeting was who thinks they would like to actively participate in these discussions, and who would be more content to follow along, I guess.
I would be interested in actively participating in this type of RFC process and governance discussion.
Okay. What?
I think
Oates, was that you?
Yeah. I mean, we already know that.
Okay. I think that's good. It's not a decision we all have to make now, but it'll help scheduling if it's not too crazy. I figured we would start with a series of sort of Zoom meetings like this, although I might like to transition to a different structure if we can. But this is maybe the easiest way to get started. Okay, so why don't I send out a doodle poll then, huzzah, and try to write up some announcement. Josh will be away for a few weeks, but that's all right. Okay, I just want to loop back over this one thing one more time. Josh is going to do this argument against, since I think we're done with the working group discussion. Agreed? Okay. Just to make sure we have all the pieces of the async-await syntax check-in thing. Josh is going to write something here. Oates, you're going to write a conclusion, and we're going to post it to the issue. For now, we can always cross-post later. And we're going to talk on May 2nd about the interaction with for loops and go over that, and then figure out the next meeting. Correct.
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Joel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nico.
Talk to you later.